This video is going to explain what socialism is, why it appeals to some people. Whoops, we're going to have to start again. Actually, okay, let's start recording at the beginning here, starting now. This video tries to explain what socialism is, why it appeals to some people, and we're going to look at 6 different case studies, including the Scandinavian social democracies that the Democratic Socialists of America say they favor, and we're going to evaluate them critically and see whether they'll work in the United States. The video is going to raise red flags that should concern all of us, and the goal is to present facts that elevates the conversation. This is not going to be a rant against socialism. I want to present facts and logic and let you make up your own mind, but please share this video so that we can get the debate going on a higher level. Let's look at why socialism appeals to so many people. It appeals because it promises a lot of things: greater economic equality, lots of free stuff paid for by others, like universal health care, free college, more generous retirement benefits, and more benefits for workers. And supposedly all of this means less financial stress and greater economic security for everyone. We have to look at history and current cases to see if that's really true. Now, there's 2 very different models, I think, that we see when people talk about socialism. The first is what we'll call revolutionary socialism and communism. Examples are the Soviet Union, Maoist China, Cuba, Venezuela. Here, what we're looking at are government control of the economy, limited private enterprise, large state bureaucracies, often single-party rule, and central economic planning. The second model we hear about when we hear about socialism is social democracy, sometimes called democratic socialism, although it's really just a large welfare state. We see this in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland. We're going to look at Denmark and Sweden as case studies. Here, you have a capitalist economy with private businesses and competitive markets, but you also have a large welfare state. And you have very high taxes, much higher than we pay in the United States and paid for by everybody. The U.S. Democratic Socialists need to help me and help all of us by resolving confusion, by being honest. The official definition of socialism is producing and distribution of goods being owned collectively or by a centralized government that also often plans and controls the economy. So it's centralized planning, and goods distribution is owned collectively, not privately. Traditionally, socialism is the intermediate step before true communists. So socialists also want to move to communism. So there's confusion here because the Democratic Socialists of America say what they really want is a generous welfare state system like we see in the Nordic countries. But that's not what socialism is. Their language is much more aligned with Marxist views of socialism, as in capitalism is irredeemable, or the platform that explicitly says we need to move beyond capitalism. So what's the real intention here? The case studies that you're going to see in this video show that many socialist and communist countries started with lovely aspirational promises like what we're seeing today from the DSA. Historically, these promises didn't end well. They led to authoritarian power and confiscation. Authoritarianism and confiscation and redistribution led to misery. And it's not just with dictatorships that started with a socialist message. Many of the large welfare states, the other model that we hear about from the Democratic Socialists of America, also face crises as a result of their policies. And some, those with large welfare states, continue to struggle with the need for reform today. So it's a little bit confusing what they're actually saying, and one has to wonder. We'll look at this more in a couple of minutes. It's worth noting, important to note, that we already have $2 trillion deficits and a huge welfare state already in the United States. In terms of retirement, Social Security's share of retirement income is 30 to 35% of all sources. So we're already covering huge retirement benefits. Healthcare is about 50% of all healthcare spending. That's by the government: Medicare, Medicaid, ACA, VA. Income support. We have SNAP, temporary assistance for needy families, and housing assistance. We're redistributing a lot of tax revenue to lower income households already. Public education, publicly funded K through 12 education, and public universities also receiving substantial taxpayer support, as well as huge government infrastructure for loans, student loans. And then there's a lot of unemployment and worker protections as well. With all of this, we're $2 trillion in deficit every single year. So we already have a huge redistributive welfare state in the United States, and it's a progressive taxation system. The wealthy pay a lot more than those with less, as I've shown in a previous video. We also don't have what you would call unfettered capitalism. We have more than 180 federal regulatory agencies, 70 to 90,000 pages of federal regulations governing just about everything we do. We have a massive transfer and safety network of programs that add up to trillions of dollars every year. We have strong antitrust laws and extensive labor regulations to protect workers. The bottom line is that we're a mixed market economy. We're not unfettered capitalism. We have extensive guardrails and extensive transfers from those who have to those who don't. Capitalism, by the way, is getting a bad rap. It's certainly not perfect, but it works really well. It works better than anything else. In the United States, we have about 5 million new business applications filed every year. New businesses are constantly being created, and markets are not stagnant. Many of our largest companies today didn't even exist a couple decades ago. The Fortune 500 constantly changes, with half turning over every 20 years. 70 to 90% of millionaires are self-made, right? They're not through inheritance or a rigged system. Most Americans change income quintiles over time. We move up and down, but we move up, especially as we age and develop in our careers. Sometimes it's just a matter of patience. The U.S. attracts entrepreneurs. Why? Because it's a great place to do business, and many of our founders are immigrants or children of immigrants. Venture capital is enormous in the United States. That allows for funding of new businesses. Many billionaires started with little wealth. And workers voluntarily change jobs frequently, far more often than workers in many developed countries. I've done some work in Romania that used to be communist. You could not move. Once you had a job, that was your job for life. If you left that job, they would give you a worse job. So capitalism, not perfect, but it works better than any other system we've ever had. Also, consumer choice is enormous. We have lots of choices in socialist and communist systems. What's the saying? We have one type of bread and we're out of it. So let's look at 4 examples of traditional revolutionary communism and socialism, and then let's look at 2 examples of the Nordic style welfare states. The Soviet Union, leader Joseph Stalin, estimated deaths from his policies, 15 to 20 million deaths. What did this system include? Purges, forced labor camps, deportations, famines. And although official incomes were compressed, Communist Party elites enjoyed luxury housing, exclusive stores, medical care, and privileges unavailable to ordinary citizens. Beware elected officials flying in private jets and wearing expensive clothing and reporting millions of dollars in assets while also promoting communism, socialism, or high welfare states. What were the economic outcomes of the Soviet Union? Chronic shortages, weak innovation, poor productivity, horrible repression, and the economy ultimately collapsed. Communist ideals did not prevent concentration of power and wealth among very few, and it produced miserable incomes. That's just case study number 1. Number 2, let's look at Maoist China with Mao Zedong. Estimated deaths, notice deaths come with this kind of system, 40 to 70 million people. This system included deadly state famine, violent youth purges, forced labor camps, destructive campaigns nationwide. And again, while ordinary Chinese suffered severe shortages and famine, Mao lived with extraordinary privileges and political power. The outcomes: China remained extremely poor until major market reforms began in 1978. 800 plus million people escaped poverty after China expanded its private enterprise and free markets. And China's greatest economic successes occurred only after moving substantially away from central planning. However, we can see today in past years under Xi Jinping, China has become more authoritarian and repressive again. So again, if you want a system that leads to repression, authoritarianism, and all of the negative outcomes economically of central planning, look no further than systems like Russia, China, and now let's look at Cuba under Fidel Castro. Here again, political repression, thousands executed or died in prison following the revolution, while government leaders enjoyed privileges unavailable to ordinary Cubans. Economic outcomes: low wages, food and medical shortages, housing shortages, heavy dependence on Soviet aid, large-scale attempts to escape. Once again, the lesson: universal benefits do not eliminate economic scarcity. Everybody tends to get poorer and worse off, except those at the top. And finally, Venezuela, starting with Hugo Chavez. What do we have here? Once again, political repression, media censorship, monopolizing all power, total system rigging. Political elites once again retained significant privileges while living standards fell dramatically. It is worth noting that Venezuela has one of the world's largest oil reserves, and yet it still experienced economic collapse, hyperinflation, food and medicine shortages, political loyalty purges that collapsed oil productivity, millions fleeing the country. Where I live, I know plenty of families that fled Venezuela, and Chavez's follower, Maduro, took their businesses away, just took them away. That's what socialism is: collective ownership, taking away private incentives. So the lessons here, once again, heavy government control combined with weak institutions can produce severe economic decline. There's a worse lesson, and that is: watch out for wolves in sheep's clothing. Today, the Democratic Socialists don't have a sickle as their logo. They've rebranded with a lovely rose. Watch out for the messages of these types of people. Lenin's early message: peace, land, bread, power to workers and peasants, end war and inequality. The results after taking power: one-party rule, suppression, secret police, civil war, repression. Stalin continues. He claims to continue Lenin's vision and build socialism. Instead, we get mass purges, forced collectivization, famine, labor camps, dictatorship. Mao promises equality, land reform, ending exploitation and foreign domination. What do they get? Famine, forced labor camps, extensive political persecution. Castro wanted to restore democracy after overthrowing dictatorship, fight corruption, reduce inequality. Instead, you get a one-party communist state, nationalization, and huge economic downturn. Chavez: help the poor, end corruption, redistribute oil wealth, empower the people. Instead, we get executive power centralization, weakened institutions, media censorship, political persecution, policy failures, and Maduro continued Chavez's vision for revolution and protecting social programs, but you got instead further erosion of democratic institutions, severe economic crises, confiscation of private businesses, hyperinflation, mass emigration. Again, watch out for aspirational messages. The Democratic Socialists of America are winning the battle of marketing. They're really good at it. They're great with social media. They have videos far more interesting than this one. They're brilliant at it, but watch out for aspirational messages that potentially, with a socialist system, can turn into disaster. All right, let's look at democratic socialism or social democracy, the big welfare state models in the Scandinavian countries that people claim to want. Let's start with Sweden and then look at Denmark as case studies. Sweden's experience is a cautionary tale. During the 70s and 80s, Sweden did exactly what the democratic socialists want to do here. They expanded taxes, spending, and regulation significantly. What happened? Economic growth slowed and competitiveness weakened. So in the 90s, they had to implement major reforms, lower tax rates, pension reform, privatization of government enterprises, school choice, expanded competition. So today, Sweden has a generous welfare state, but also has one of Europe's more market-oriented economies. They had to reel everything back. Governments that expand their welfare state model often go too far. They have to return to competitive markets and private enterprise, and that is very hard to do. Sweden is the exception. They were lucky with their reforms. If we look at other European countries that are trying to do the same, we see some real struggles. France, even a modest increase in retirement age has led to riots, shutdowns, and strikes. In Spain, following the Eurozone crisis, the government tried reforms. They were met with strikes and protests. Reform could only be gradual and with sustained political conflict. Italy attempted pension reforms, and they were met with strikes and union opposition, and the government largely reversed course. And by the way, if you look at these three countries, they're not especially doing well economically. Portugal, after 2011, it needed financial reforms, that is, higher taxes, lower public salaries and benefits. There were huge demonstrations, court challenges, and once the economy improved, there was pressure to reverse reforms once again. Greece only reformed when they could no longer finance their debt and they needed a bailout. So these expansions of welfare states, without being able to pay for them, tend not to work well. And once they happen, it's really hard to reverse course. This is the pattern we should avoid. One, government expands benefits and public programs. We already have a huge welfare state. We already have a lot of public programs. We're $2 trillion in debt. Expanding them more is a problem because citizens then view these benefits as earned rights, right? Who was it who said the only way to have immortality is with a government program? Once it starts, it becomes an entitlement. And then you have problems like we have now, demographic changes, more older Americans, fewer workers, slower economic growth, sometimes because of large debt and rising debt that makes financing ongoing spending harder and more painful. So what happens? Governments propose raising taxes, reducing benefits, or increasing retirement ages, which we're going to need to do now without any further change. And so people resist. You get strikes, protests, electoral backlash. In some cases, governments fall. So reforms have to happen eventually, but they happen slowly, partially, or only under a crisis, severe financial pressure. And these countries tend to experience stagnation and decline over time. A lot of people think the United States is already in this pattern and has enough work on its hands just to get out of the trouble we have now. So let's look at Denmark, though. It's one of the countries that a lot of people point to as a good example that America should follow. Denmark has some appealing features. It has capitalism, private property, free markets, but it also has extensive government services. So citizens get universal health care, tuition-free universities, paid parental leave, strong unemployment benefits, and very generous public pensions. People like it. There's lower financial risk, lower poverty, higher life satisfaction, and a strong social safety net. I can see it's appealing. Denmark demonstrates that you can have a large welfare state and have that coexist with capitalism. But Denmark is not the United States. It has 6 million people. We have 340 million people. We have a huge landmass. They're a small landmass. Denmark historically is more homogeneous than the United States. We are an extremely diverse country. Denmark doesn't really have a lot of military responsibilities. The USA is a global military superpower and needs to be. Denmark has generally balanced finances. We have a $2 trillion deficit every year and growing debt. Denmark is a small export-oriented economy. We're the world's reserve currency. We can't jeopardize that. So the United States, in addition, spends hundreds of billions of dollars more on national defense. Right now, $1 trillion on interest on the national debt alone, And we have huge global security commitments that nobody who's serious wants us to give up. These are really significant differences when comparing economic models. It's kind of apples and oranges in terms of two different countries. Denmark provides a lot of what we buy privately. So they give government funded health care, college tuition, paid family leave, child care assistance, larger public pensions. We have to pay privately for these. So what does that mean? That means people in Denmark have greater financial security, universal access to benefits, and lower personal financial risk. But here in the United States, we have lower taxes, as you'll see in a minute. We have more consumer choice. We have greater entrepreneurial incentives, and we have a lot more private innovation. And in fact, comparing Denmark to the United States helps to highlight the secret sauce that makes the United States so powerful, so special, and so great. What would it cost, though, if we wanted to go to a model like Denmark and countries like it? Well, here's the difficult fact that everybody has to get their heads around. Denmark collects a lot more in taxes than the United States. In fact, 15 to 17% more of their economy is taxed than in the United States. So applying that model here would need $4 to $5 trillion more in additional annual taxes. That's $15,000 to $30,000 per year more in taxes for a typical middle income family. So the net financial impact, of course, would differ, right? We're definitely going to be paying a lot more to government. We get some things for free, but we're essentially making all of us pay more for things that some people receive. Net, we're going to be paying a lot more, and we're going to be taxed a lot more broadly than we are now. Why? Because you can't just tax the rich. It is so tiring to see these slogans. Take it from billionaires, have a wealth tax, tax the rich. Certainly, mathematically, there's room for some more taxing of the wealthy, even though they pay way more than their share of income earned in taxes, as I've shared in another video. I'll do another video on taxes soon, too. But the math doesn't work. All that we're doing by saying, go after the billionaires, they're bad people, there shouldn't be billionaires, there shouldn't be wealthy, is create class envy and divide us even more while politicians gain. If you want to look at the facts, European countries finance their systems with taxes paid by nearly everyone. Lots of taxes, much higher income taxes, much higher payroll taxes, a value-added tax, basically a national sales tax as high as 25%, fuel taxes nationally, consumption taxes. The middle class helps finance these programs, and that would be about $15,000 to $30,000 more in taxes per year for the average American family. Also, before we do anything, we have to clean up our $2 trillion in deficits. We're spending way more than we bring in. So it's not like we're starting with a balanced budget. We're not. Any new programs are going to weigh us down even more. It'll mean more borrowing, higher interest costs, or more interest payments. We're already paying $1 trillion a year in interest on our debt, higher national debt. We're shifting more costs onto future generations if we do this. So really, we have to address our existing fiscal imbalance before we talk about radically changing our entire economic system. We already have a big problem. We're already in the hole. There's other concerns raised by critics of democratic socialism. Larger government brings with it more regulation, bigger bureaucracies, bigger potential for fraud, abuse, and corruption, greater political influence over economic decisions, reduced incentives for investment and entrepreneurship, which is something that makes our country amazing, slower innovation, and less individual choice in healthcare, education, and retirement. So there's a lot of concerns that come up just beyond the cost and who gets taxed. There's also some red flags specific to democratic socialists in the United States that I think we all have to look out for. You can, I highly recommend you check out other resources, National Review, Daily Wire. I like Chicks on the Right. There's all sorts of wonderful resources, Wall Street Journal editorials that get more at these. But here's some other problems with democratic socialists. One, they have a view that America is not an exceptional or special place. And they have an emphasis on our past mistakes while downplaying our remarkable successes. There's a desire for reduced border enforcement, military, and police. That's a big issue. I think the number one role of government is to keep us safe and to know who's in our country legally and who's not. They're also forming alliances with other groups and individuals that, just to put it nicely, do not support Western values, the values that built our country and that make it strong. I think you also see a victim mentality. It's always somebody else. Let's go after somebody else. It's not our fault. There's a lack of thinking about individual responsibility, effort, and accountability. It's as if we're all victims. We can't be successful without taking over the country centrally. There's also a tendency to divide us in this party by pitting genders, races, economic classes, generations, and other types of groups against each other. We're all fighting all the time while they gain power, and that's pretty nasty. There's also a never-ending list of things to give away for free, funded by a slippery slope of taking away already taxed income, property, and wealth. When does it stop? What is our fair share of taxes? When do we stop giving things away for free? There's also a strange psychology among socialists. There's a lot of successful people who are socialists. They became successful with the system that they're trying to tear down. And so it's really odd to me. It's hypocritical or contradictory or paradoxical that you have a group of people that receive fantastic benefits and want to tear the whole system down, while, of course, they stay in power. My advice, there's plenty of people in the United States that have fled socialist models. I know people from Romania who lived during communism. I know people from Venezuela, and I'm going to quote somebody I know from Venezuela here. I know people from Russia that left the Soviet Union. Here's what a professional I know that lived through Chavez and Maduro had to say. Unfortunately, most people seem to learn only through direct experience. It's a major risk when you mix several factors: the desire for free public services, social class divisions, short-term thinking, a lack of macroeconomic understanding, the younger generation's political indifference, and politicians' ability to sell ideas. This creates across time a significant vulnerability for almost every country. I truly hope for the very best for the US. I love America. Listen to that first thing. Unfortunately, most people seem to learn only through direct experience. We can think about socialism rationally. The history is there, the facts are there. It would be tragic if a country as special as the United States had to learn through direct experience what a disaster these types of programs are. So we have to be involved, right? I know most people who are against socialists are hardworking. We have a lot of things to do with our time. It's hard, but we have to be involved. We're already running $2 trillion deficits. We already have a generous welfare system. We already have plenty of guardrails on our capitalist system. We already have too much fraud, abuse, waste, and corruption now, let alone if we allow even bigger government, more welfare programs, more centralizations. The problem is socialists are just too good at messaging and marketing. They're brilliant right now. The ones in America, they've changed the logo from the sickle and the star and the hammer and all that to a beautiful rose. They talk about how wonderful it will be. It's all aspirational, but it never works. But they're so good at marketing on social media and talking to an audience that might not know enough history, don't understand what's unique about our size, population, diversity, history, and global status. So please, we have to get involved. Share this video, subscribe if you would, so you can be notified about new videos, and visit longtermamerica.com to learn more, to get involved. We're just a group of ordinary people trying to look at what makes America strong over the long term, regardless of political party. Thank you. Oh, let's do one thing. Instead of thank you, cut that out and say something like, and please leave comments below. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about socialism? No, don't do that. Yeah, just end it. Thank you. Just end it. Thank you.